Hello, adventuresses, and welcome to the show for women who love horses, travel, and adventure. Today, I'm going to be talking to Jessica from America, and her partner have done a really amazing thing. They're traveling around America. They bought a horse trailer. They're living in their horse trailer, and they just travel from state to state, riding around, and they also do rock climbing, and she even convinced her partner to ride horses with her, so she's having these really amazing adventures in the U.S.A., and she gives a lot of really interesting tips and advice on how you can do something similar. And she shares some really interesting stories, one of which is, I'm going to have to say it, but it's very stereotypical American, I think. It involves guns. So yeah, stay tuned and listen to the full episode. You're going to want to hear her stories. Before we get started, I have a couple of really exciting announcements. The first of which is our YouTube channel is now active. We have some videos, including, right now I'm currently sitting in Brazil, and I'm participating unofficially, but I am participating in the Marcha, which is 750 kilometers. So I posted a couple of videos on our YouTube channel about that, and there's going to be a whole lot more of exciting videos coming out, such as the episode in Greece, which I filmed not that long ago. So check out our YouTube channel. It's also Equestrian Adventuresses. And the other announcement that I have to make is we have just launched, I'm super excited about this because my first time I can say this, we have our own jewelry collection now. It's the Adventuress collection, and we have the galloping horse with a woman on it running around the world, and it's absolutely beautiful. You can get bracelets, necklaces, pendants. They have these beautiful leather bands or leather necklace strap cords. So be sure to check it out. It's at silversteeds.co.uk, and it ships anywhere in the world, and they're absolutely gorgeous. They're sterling silver, and I'm super excited about it. I'm actually wearing it now while I'm competing in the Marcha, and it cheers me up when I'm on about, 30, 40K in the day, and I'm feeling a little bit blue, and I have my blue Adventuresses bracelet. So check it out, silversteed.co.uk, and you are the first to hear about it here on the podcast, so check it out. If you haven't downloaded our catalog already, also visit our website, equestrianadventuresses.com. Not only do we have lots of free resources and cool things like articles about awesome women having adventures, but we have the catalog, which is horse riding in every country. It actually is a list of over 400 plus stables in 180 different countries. You can literally just browse. It's 72 pages, and it's completely free. So if you haven't downloaded it, go and get it, and then book your next riding holiday. And speaking of your next riding holiday, we have special exclusive discounts just for you adventurous listeners. Doesn't matter, male, female, anyone. This is for anyone that is supporting the Adventuresses community. All you have to do to get these discounts, and this is for riding tours around the world. We've specially contacted around 10 or so different stables, and we're going to be adding more and more to the list every month. And you can just go and you can get discounts. And some of these discounts are pretty crazy, okay? You're going to be saving 300 euros or more. Or, if you bring a friend, you can get extra discounts. So you're not going to want to miss this. You'll find it on our Patreon account. So all you have to do is go to equestrianadventuresses.com, and you'll see the little button which says Premium Members. And it's super cheap. It's $15 a month, and you're going to make that money back super quickly. So check it out at equestrianadventuresses.com. And hit it! We are explorers. We are trailblazers. We love to do what cannot be done. We love to test our limits, cross borders, and we love the freedom horses bring us. We seek lands without fences. Who are we? We are Equestrian Adventuresses. We are a community of women who love horses, travel, and adventure.
To infinity and beyond!
And now your host, Crystal Kelly.
Hello, adventuresses. I am talking today with Jess, and she's actually sitting in Wyoming right now. So, hi, Jess.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So you're traveling around America a lot. I've been following you on Facebook for a while, I think, and all of your beautiful photos. But before we really dive into the, grand adventure that you're on right now, I would love to just step back a little bit and hear, how you started, like how you got into horses, and then what shifted into this nomadic lifestyle that you're doing now.
Okay, well, I grew up on a very small thoroughbred breeding farm in New Jersey. Horses were my mother's passion, and she tried to make a business of breeding thoroughbreds. So I grew up with them, and I was riding off-track thoroughbreds when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. So that was an interesting education. And I spent my whole life competing in various disciplines, from hunt seat to stock seat to carriage driving and endurance. And in 2013, when I was 30 years old, my mother was diagnosed with lymphoma, and she passed away 6 weeks later. And that hit me pretty hard. And I decided that I was going to quit my job and live out her dreams as well as mine, because I was worried that my life would be cut short as well. So I started an organic farm to try to grow healthy food for people. And I had great success with that for about 5 years. And then that started to wear on me mentally and physically. So one of the things that my mother and I had always dreamed about doing together was traveling the country with our horses and riding in all of the beautiful places that we could think of. So my partner and I decided to drop everything, sell the business, and hit the road.
So you've had obviously a very devastating thing happen to you, and you were trying this business, and was the business going well? Like, were you getting good money from this, and did you just sort of decide, okay, that's enough, or were you sort of struggling a little bit trying to get your head around things? And I don't know, how does that? It must be a big emotional step to do something as big as this.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I'm a little bit surprised that I had the courage to do it, but I attribute a lot of that to the support of my partner, Byron. He was there for me, encouraging me every step of the way, and every decision I made, he was telling me to just go for it. So I started my organic farm growing vegetables and humanely raising livestock on pasture. And farming is a tough business to get started in, and it's extremely difficult to make a good living. So I did struggle for a few years while I was building my clientele, building up my infrastructure. But then after a few years, I did finally get to the point where I was making a decent living. It was a ton of work, but I had finally succeeded, and I was trying to teach other beginning farmers what I was doing and how I had had success and how to properly manage a business in order to be successful financially, because a lot of farmers do it because they love growing food or working with animals, but they don't have the business savvy. So I ended up teaching business planning courses and also developing a web app that tracks all of your financial and management data so that farmers have records and can analyze those records to know what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong and improve their businesses.
Okay, so you developed your business and you started to shift it online. So was it easy to sort of walk away? Because I know how much effort it goes into building your own business, and then to just one day wake up and say, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. It must be really difficult, I think, to sort of make that leap.
Absolutely. Starting this business and running it for so long and putting so much blood, sweat, and tears into it made it extremely emotional. And it did take me a long time to come around to the idea of selling it off and shutting it down and essentially quitting that lifestyle. So yeah, it was very hard. But looking back on it now, I don't have any regrets because l- life is all about learning and growth and exploring new things. So I feel very proud of what I did and what I accomplished in those 5 short years. It takes most people a lifetime, if ever, to build a successful business, and I was able to do that relatively quickly. Not to sound conceited or toot my own horn too much, but I think that was a pretty impressive feat, and I I gain a lot of satisfaction from that. So it was very difficult walking away, but I am trying to expand my knowledge base and my life and go different directions and experience different things. I'm 36 now, so I still have a lot of life to live and a lot of other things to do and things to learn.
Yeah, and so your partner, was he horsey, or how did he come into this decision?
Oh no, it's funny. He was raised on Staten Island and went to high school in Manhattan, so he's very much a city boy. When we met, he enjoyed hiking and camping and rock climbing, and we both have very adventurous spirits, and we discussed our quote unquote escape plans of how to get out of the 9 to 5 typical rat race of our culture, on our first date. So we kind of had the plans for this lifestyle from the beginning without really knowing it.
And did you have, like, I don't know, other friends or family members trying to talk you guys out of it, or did they not think that your idea was serious, like, oh, she'll never do that, or did you have a support network around you?
His family was fairly supportive. They they certainly weren't against it. My my father is a bit of a worrywart, so he was very nervous about the idea of me not having a home, even though I live in a travel trailer. Um, Technically, we have a home, it's just on wheels, but he was also concerned about our safety and all of that. So he was a little bit on the negative side, but Byron's family is just incredible and they support us in every decision. And, they want to drive across the country and visit us. And we've inspired our friends and other family members to take long road trips and travel more. So it's all been pretty positive.
Great. And so what was the first steps? What was your guys, did you guys have a plan, or did you just wing it, or?
Well, our first steps were figuring out what we were going to live in. So that actually came about sort of organically because I was leasing farmland in order to run my business. And we knew that we wanted to downsize at the time that I was running the business before we even came up with the idea of living full time on the road. So he had owned a house in New Jersey, and we put the house on the market, started selling off all of our belongings, and purchased a 28-foot camper trailer, travel trailer, whatever you call it. It's basically a house. It has a bathroom, a kitchen, a living area, and a bedroom. So we purchased that and actually lived in it for about 7 months on the farmland that I was leasing. And then I picked up the whole farm and moved it about a year later to a new property where there was an 1800s farmhouse that we were required to live in if we were going to lease that property. So we stored our camper trailer and lived in a real house for about a year. And then during that year, I decided that things were not going to work out on that property and in that area. And I was starting to become restless and dissatisfied with how things were going. So that was the point where we decided to really sell off and donate all of our belongings. We had more I had more farm equipment than we had personal equipment or furniture in the house. So really selling off all of the farm's assets was the biggest pain in the butt and took the most amount of time. So I spent months and months and months paring everything down, selling off livestock and all of their equipment so that we could become as lightweight and flexible as possible. And then we started planning where we wanted to go, where we wanted to stay. And our first stop was in New Hampshire. We were rock climbers, so we identified a world-class cliff and climbing area in New Hampshire in the White Mountains. And then I discovered that there was a full-service horse campground very nearby. So I contacted them, made our reservation for 2 months over the summer of 2018, and we picked up and moved our camper there, and then brought my horse. We only had one horse at the time, up, and we lived out of that campground for 2 months, taking little side trips to Vermont and New York, and actually an endurance ride in Maine.
Wow, okay, so you went through this big process. It sounds like it took you over a year to kind of sell everything and get yourself actually on the road. And finally, you managed to do that, and then your adventure begins. So how did that feel? Did you feel like this big weight was lifted, or were you a bit nervous?
Oh, it was every emotion that you can think of. I was very nervous and scared to make this huge change in my life during the months leading up to our departure from New Jersey. So, I was running through every possible thing that could go wrong. I had one horse, and she's a thoroughbred, and Cleveland Bay, actually. But the thoroughbred in her makes her very anxious. So, I was constantly worrying, is she going to be okay living alone? She had a buddy for years and was used to living with another horse. And then we had to transition her to living alone. And that was very stressful for me because I was so concerned she would hurt herself or colic or, something. And then I was not an experienced horse trailer driver. I drove livestock all over the place, but I didn't haul my horse around very often. So I also had to worry about that and become accustomed to driving the horse in a trailer all the time. And I was just always thinking about 5 steps ahead of all of the bad things that could happen. But then at the same time, I was very excited to open this new chapter in my life and have a break from the backbreaking labor of running a farm. My body had gotten very run down. I had mentally and emotionally been struggling for a while. I was starting to process losing my mother. So like the anniversary would come around and I would be depressed and anxious and kind of lost myself in my work as a mechanism for dealing with it. And now that I was shutting the farm down and not having to worry about working so hard, I was able to think about this and process it. So there were all these emotions going through me. But ultimately now, after almost a year, we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary of living on the road. I look back on all of that and realize that the anxiety and the fear of the unknown was just so unwarranted because everything has worked out so well. People are always afraid of the unknown and of taking chances and going somewhere they've never been before. But I've learned that it's really not an issue. It's very simple if you just keep your head wrapped around the basic necessities of life. everything else falls into place.
Yeah, yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I know when I first started traveling, I was actually 21 when I left America, and I remember my friends were all very impressed, like, oh, wow, you're in this country, and then you're in that country. And I was really confused for a while because I was like, well, I just bought the flight ticket and got on the plane. Like, anyone can do that. But I realized, after a while, like, how many people just don't buy the ticket. You know what I mean? How many people just don't get on the plane? And so, you did it. You were one of the few that you said you were going to do it, and you did it. And you had to overcome so many obstacles, and, you did it. So I think that in itself is actually the the missing piece in most people's, just do it.
Yeah, I agree completely. I'm always shocked when I meet someone who has never left their home state or their hometown or the country.
Yeah.
And I always think about what they're missing and wish that they would be a little bit more adventurous.
Yeah, definitely. Especially because, it's not like you can watch this stuff on TV, you have to actually experience it. And I think more and more, the more that you experience things, the more that you seek other experiences. It's not about stuff, it's about experiences.
Absolutely.
So,
and too many people are wrapped up in the stuff. And I felt like I was caught up in that as well, because growing up in the New York City metropolitan area, the suburbs of New Jersey, our whole local culture is just completely stuck in the idea that in order to succeed in life, you have to have a good job and work in the city and make six figures and raise a family. And it's just so much incredible pressure to succeed in the way that society wants you to. And it's just not necessary. But it took me a long time for my pride to get around to realizing that.
Yeah.
But losing my mom is what helped me realize that life is here to be lived. You only get one shot. Don't waste it living someone else's idea of what you're supposed to do. Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. And it is very much in our culture in America, work. We're very hard workers as Americans. So, I definitely had a hard time even when I would go back and visit my friends and they couldn't really fathom, oh, what do you mean you get 2 weeks off of work only in the whole year? Like, yeah.
And there's certainly nothing wrong with hard work. I mean, look at you. You're running a business and developing websites and all of that. And you're working very hard, but it's something that you love and that you believe in. It's not someone else's business that you're dumping your entire soul into for their profit.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So you started this adventure. You started in New Hampshire, you said. Did you have an idea of which places to go or how much time to spend in each place? Or did you just show up and say, let's stay here for as long as we feel like, and then find somewhere else to go?
No, we had a pretty rough plan. Like I said, we wanted to combine our rock climbing and my horse riding together. So, because at that time Byron wasn't a rider, so we chose New Hampshire for the combination of the two, and then we knew that we did not want to experience a Northeast winter ever again. So we decided to flee south and chose Arizona because it seemed like it would have a nice winter climate that would be comfortable, and there were rock climbing opportunities. So I started investigating places for us to live for a few months over the winter in Arizona and discovered that Arizona is a hotbed for equestrian snowbirds. Snowbird is the term for people from the north who flee to the south to escape the winter weather. And it turned out that most of the campgrounds were booked up a year in advance. So I actually needed to make the reservation for our stay in May of 2018, which was a month before we even left for New Hampshire. So we had that planned out and reserved. And then from there, we figured we wanted to make some kind of loop through the West, the Rockies or the West Coast through California and Oregon. But we didn't have a solid plan at that time. We just kind of were so overwhelmed by everything else that was happening. We made our reservation for the winter, and we knew we would get there and then figure it out.
And how does that work? So you have this horse trailer. You said you don't have a whole lot of experience traveling with your horse and your horse trailer. Were you very nervous, or was there any special preparations you made with your horse to practice for this long distance drive?
I did a little bit of traveling locally when I first got the trailer, like in the year leading up to our departure from New Jersey. So I would haul her out and go trail riding with friends or to 100 paces and things like that. So she got a little bit of experience in the trailer, but it didn't really, neither of us got really, really comfortable and used to it until we started traveling more and longer distances. But I did have to work on getting her more comfortable with loading into the trailer. And then I was using the second stall of the 2-horse trailer to store extra hay and equipment. So, visually it looks different for the horse to enter the trailer when that side is blocked up with a bunch of stuff. So I had to work on that as well. And then I was kind of mentally planning like our routes. I knew I didn't want to travel more than 4 to 6 hours in a day. And I wanted to make sure that Mackenzie, my horse, kept eating and stayed hydrated because she was obviously very nervous at first when we were traveling a lot. So she would never touch her hay in the trailer. So I would stop every 2 or 3 hours when we needed to get more fuel and offer her a wet mash of beet pulp and alfalfa and things to keep her happy and hydrated. And then I practiced at some endurance rides and competitive trail rides, doing the whole camping thing, like setting up our own corral with electric fence or portable corral panels, and then pitching a tent next to the corral where the horse was. So she got accustomed to seeing a tent and hearing it flapping in the wind, and then living in electric fence and just, like not living at home, doing something different.
Yeah.
And now, after all of this time and all of the many, many moves we've done, my horses, now that we have 2, are just professional travelers, and anywhere new is home. They just automatically settle in. They're not nervous. They barely even look around when they get off in a new place. They just settle so quickly and easily, and they know that the trailer is home.
So how does that work then? So I've driven a lot across America, and I know at rest stops, there's like little doggy parks that the dogs can run around. So how does that work with horses? Like, is there certain areas that you can stop and rest and camp there, or let the horses run around for a night, or how does that work?
Well, there's a whole network across the country of what are called horse motels. So it's usually a private stable that has a few extra stalls or extra corrals or a pasture where they'll allow travelers to spend an overnight. And I found that through the website. I believe it's horsehotel.com. So that's been extremely helpful. We've searched for places through that website where we just wanted to spend one night, literally just sleep on our way to a further destination. But if we're if we're driving through areas with places where we want to stop and climb or ride the trails and spend a little bit more time, we usually try to select national forests where you can dispersed camp for free. That's very common in the West where there's more public land like BLM and national forest. Or we find actual campgrounds that have horse facilities. So that could also be in a national forest or even a state park. There are lots of places that have what's considered dry camping, where you could stay in an RV or a camper trailer and have water and a bathroom accessible, but there aren't actual hookups for the trailer like in some of the fancier, well-equipped campgrounds. We have water, sewer, and electric hookups that go right into our trailer where we live. So there are tons and tons of different options, and we just select our route, like choose a destination, and then I map it out and see how long it'll take us to get there. And if it's over my driving time limit for the day, I start looking around for places where we can set up our own camp for free because we're trying to live economically. And then if that is not a possibility, I look for other campgrounds that might have better facilities, maybe where there's a corral where we wouldn't need to make the effort to set up our own corrals. And it's out west here, it's so easy to find those things because there are so many more horse people, and the horse culture and trail riding culture is so much greater in the West. And for good reason. I mean, it's gorgeous. There's tons and tons of open land and backcountry to explore. So it's worked out very well.
And have you had any, I don't know, difficulties or issues with trying to find, I don't know, water for the horses, or do you need, like you said with Arizona, you needed a year notice in advance? Have you had any difficulties or issues at all?
Yes, occasionally a place that we want to stay will be booked up, or they can only accommodate us for maybe a couple days instead of a longer stay. And we do usually prefer to stay a longer amount of time because it is a lot of work picking everything up and moving everything if it's only a few days or a week. But when something like that happens, we just roll with the punches and figure something else out. It's really just a matter of how you look at it and being able to be flexible. And luckily we are flexible because we are fairly self-contained. When we were staying in the desert in Moab, Utah, the access to water did become a little bit of an issue because the campground that we were staying in did not have any water, potable or non-potable. So every 2 to 3 days, I would need to drive our truck down into the town to a gas station where they had potable water for free, which was a wonderful, wonderful thing. So essentially they had a spigot on the side of their building with a hose, and I would back my truck up to it and fill a bunch of big barrels and water containers, and I could hold about 70 to 80 gallons of water for the horses and for us. And then that would get us through 2 or 3 days. But if we were doing that for a month or more, it would become very tedious. So we only stayed in that location for about 2 weeks.
And what was your daily routine or schedule like? So you wind up in Arizona, you have one horse, your husband doesn't ride, he does rock climbing. So what was your guys' routine? Did you just make your coffee, high five in the morning, and he went rock climbing and you rode horses? Or what was your daily schedule?
Well, ironically, in Arizona, we thought we were selecting a location very close to a climbing area, but it was on the opposite side of the mountain from where you access it. So it ended up being a 2-hour drive to get to the climbing location. And then the weather, because we were staying at a higher elevation, which we didn't quite realize when we were planning it, the weather ended up being much colder. And actually, this winter in Arizona and the whole Southwest was much wetter and colder than they've experienced in a long time. So we got snow and horrible winds and cold rain. There were a few really nice days, but there was quite a bit of the winter that we had been trying to escape. So we didn't do as much rock climbing. But Byron works full time. So he would essentially be inside working all day, and I would go outside and work with my horse and do training and ride and have fun. I tried to take quite a few months off when we first started this lifestyle because I had been so burnt out from running my business. I just kind of luxuriated in getting to have fun with my horse every day. And then about a month after we were in Arizona and I'd gone on a bunch of trail rides and Byron had decided to join either on foot or on a bicycle, but then quickly found that the trails were very technical and steep mountains and rocky terrain. He started getting a little frustrated with following on foot or on the bike, and we started discussing the idea of getting him a horse. And that had been on the back burner for a while, but we wanted to see what life was really like traveling with a horse. He was concerned that it would be too much hassle to have a second horse. And of course, I was advocating for the companionship that another horse would offer. So we did finally get around to looking, and I quickly found a really nice horse for him, and we ended up buying her. And then our days turned into a lot more riding. And once he got his first horse, he just fell in love with her. And it was so nice for me to see him learning about riding and asking questions and being curious about training methods. And then, he would talk to other guests in our campground and tell them all the things he had learned and experienced. So that was really fun seeing that discovery through someone else's eyes. But we ended up doing a ton of riding because he was so excited about it. So we were doing sometimes 50 miles a week through this rugged, mountainous Arizona terrain it was beautiful, but still pretty cold. But yeah, it was really nice, and that kind of became our routine. We've slowed down a little bit and been traveling a lot more since we left Arizona in April. So I guess you could say the excitement has worn off a little bit. So we've settled into a calmer routine where we get up in the morning, I chill out with my coffee on the couch, drink 1 cup, and then I go outside and feed the horses and clean their pens and groom or take them out for a little hand walk to graze. I do feel badly sometimes when they have to be confined to smaller stalls, like maybe a 12 by 12. So I try to take them out and give them exercise, even if we're not riding, and give them some mental stimulation. And then depending on the weather, if it's good weather, we might go climbing. If it's bad weather, we stay inside and do work. I try to write for my blog, but sometimes I don't have good enough internet signal to work on a computer very much. So the last few months, especially with traveling, I haven't gotten as much done. But honestly, a lot of my time is taken up by the logistics of our route. So I have reformulated our plan for this entire year at least 40 different times because weather changes or some commitment pops up or friends want to meet us somewhere, so we have to time things to meet them. And So I spend a ton of time doing research into the next place that we're going to go. How do we get there? Where do we stop in between? Does this make sense to go this far or that far? So it's constantly being reworked. And then I also enjoy competing in endurance, so I factor that in and start looking for rides in different states where we might be able to go. And I try to keep everything planned out at least 6 months in advance. But it's constantly changing, especially with the weather, because we really don't like sitting in a campground for an extended period of time when it's pouring rain or snowing. And just a couple weeks ago in May, we moved to a campground in South Dakota, and the day after we got there, it snowed over a foot, and it was cold and rainy for the entire first week. So that's a real bummer, and we're learning how to avoid bad weather and where we should go and not go at certain times of the year.
So which places have you ridden so far, and what's your rough, I don't know, riding goal or map? Like, when does this quest end, if it ever ends?
Well, boy, that's a lot of places. So like I said, last summer was New England. We did a lot of riding in New Hampshire and then up to Maine and then to Vermont and New York State. And then we spent all winter in Arizona, so tons of riding around there. And then from there, we moved up to southern Utah into the Canyonlands, which, was by far my absolute favorite place we've stopped. The canyons are just so beautiful with the red sandstone and stripes of gray and pink on the rocks. It's just surreal. It's the coolest place I've ever been.
Yeah, I saw a lot of the pictures that you were posting about that, and it just looked really amazing. And I was like, oh my gosh, how come I'm American and I've never been there?
I know. I feel like no one knows about Utah. It's such an underrated state. People think of Salt Lake City and maybe skiing, and that's it. But
And Mormons.
yeah, and Mormons, which there are a lot of, but most of them are extremely nice. I haven't met a mean one at all. And they don't badger you to join their religion as much as we all think they do. But yeah, it was really interesting seeing the terrain and the canyons there, and I would love to go back and spend more time. So then from Utah, we moved up to South Dakota, and that was where it snowed. But we were up in the mountains near Mount Rushmore. That's a very famous landmark. And we got to explore some of the mountains and the pine forests, and one of the state parks in that area has a free-ranging herd of bison. So we were able to ride on the trails and through these big meadows and stumble upon herds of bison grazing and drinking out of the river and sleeping under the trees in the shade. And that was really, really cool. We also ran into herds of elk out on trail rides in the woods. So that was a cool experience. And then we moved from there to Sundance, Wyoming. And Sundance is known for what's called Devil's Tower. It's a huge pillar of volcanic rock just in the middle of nowhere. And it has a lot of rock climbing, so we chose that destination for climbing. But unfortunately, when we arrived at the park, we realized or discovered that it was closed for the entire month of June because of the religious and cultural significance to the Native American tribes that hold that land sacred. They ask you not to climb during the month. So we just did some sightseeing around there and then rode a few miles, about 15 miles up into the mountains around the tower and in that area. And then from there, we moved to Ten Sleep, Wyoming, which is where we are now. And Ten Sleep is an area that's fairly flat, but then it's right at the edge of the Bighorn Mountains, which go up to 10,000 feet or something like that. And it's just a huge, huge national forest and mountain range that spans a gigantic portion of the northeast part of Wyoming. And there's a canyon right outside of town with huge rock walls and cliffs where there's tons and tons of climbing. So we're very excited. We just got here last week and settled in for a day, and then packed up my trailer and took one of the horses to an endurance ride where we did 50 miles in another part of Wyoming that actually reminded me a little bit of the terrain in Arizona, ironically. So we haven't gotten to do too much climbing or riding or sightseeing around here yet, but we're looking forward to it.
Wow, so lots of places. And what was your, I don't know, what's your next destination or your end goal? Or
Well, at this point, I have a loop planned out where we'll go from here to the western side of Wyoming to Jackson, into the mountains just south of Yellowstone National Park. So we're going to check out Yellowstone and go down into the Wind River Range and do a lot of riding in the backcountry and hopefully some climbing as well. And then from there, we are going to cut across to southern Idaho, where there's also another rock climbing area that has a campground with horse corrals called City of Rocks. And then we will continue west across Nevada to Lake Tahoe, California. And we're going to arrive there about a week before the Tevis endurance ride. And I'm fascinated by and just awed by people who can ride 100 miles, because I just did my first 50. I can't even quite wrap my head around the idea of doing 100. So I'm really excited to go to Tevis, and I'm actually going to crew for another rider and her horse. So I'm going to get to learn a lot from that experience and see it and be around all the excitement of the hardest endurance race in the U.S. And then from there, we're going to go south to Yosemite National Park and do a bunch of climbing. And I hope to ride in the backcountry of Yosemite. Yosemite is one of my favorite places so far on the earth. And I've been there numerous times, and we've climbed Half Dome, which is one of the big iconic rock features in the park. So we're excited to go back and do more exploring there. And then our plan is to kind of tool around in Southern California over the winter and hopefully have an easier time and maybe not be quite as cold as we were last winter in Arizona. And we're also looking into hopefully boarding the horses with someone in Southern California so that we can take a couple international trips over the winter as well.
wow, lots and lots of places. So how much time are you spending roughly in each place?
2 weeks to a month.
Okay. And so when you show up at a place and you want to go riding around on the trails, is there specific maps or trails, or how are you finding? Do you worry about getting lost on your horse in the middle of some strange place and you don't know how to get back? Or
No, not really. We do track all of our rides with a GPS mapping app that's on our phones. So we at least always know how to get back. But out west, it's so much open country, and you can usually see for great distances and identify landmarks. So I'm never worried about getting lost. It's more like, am I going to run into some kind of impassable barricade and have to double back the way that I came instead of completing a nice loop and seeing new territory the whole time? But I do like to get the lay of the land and have some kind of map before going out, just because I'm more curious than concerned about getting lost. And I do like to know how far the trail might go and how many miles we're going to do and how long it'll take, especially planning around weather, because it seems like thunderstorms tend to roll in the afternoon, and you don't want to be up at high elevation and get pelted by hail or horrible winds and get chilled. So it's more a planning tool than safety. Initially, before I had any experience riding out west, I was very concerned about riding out into the wilderness and being far from civilization and not knowing where to go and getting lost. But again, once you have a little bit of experience and dip your toe into it, you realize it's not that big of a deal. You're really not that far away from civilization unless you go maybe up into Canada where there's extensive wilderness. When you're down in the lower 48, yeah, you could be 20 or 30 miles from the nearest house or town. But now that I have experience riding longer and longer distances, I'm not as concerned about that. But the National Forest Service websites usually have horse trails listed, so you can search a specific park or area for trails that are recommended for horses, and then they'll usually have sometimes convoluted way of accessing a topographic map with those trails. Or there are lots of great mapping apps, and one that I particularly enjoy is called Ride with GPS. It was actually designed for mountain biking, but in that app they have maybe 6 or more different map interfaces that you can use, and a few of them have topo lines and trails designated by whatever wilderness area or national park or national forest. So I've been able to investigate different areas and look into different rides we might want to do. I kind of, for a little while, became infatuated with this idea of doing some backcountry, kind of like overnight backpacking / riding, and found a trail in Wyoming that's 80 miles long, and it's just a point-to-point, not a loop. So through these different mapping apps like Ride with GPS, I was able to see that on a map and look at the topo lines and figure out how steep it is, what elevation would we be at, could I actually make this into a week-long pack trip through the mountains. Ultimately, I decided we are not quite experienced enough to be carrying all of our horses' feed and camping above tree line and not having access to water. You know, it was just too high of a risk for Byron, my beginner rider. I mean, I think eventually we'll get there, but not this year. So, yeah. But still, it's really, the internet and modern age is just so wonderful because you have access to all of this information. You may just have to dig around a little bit to find it, but it makes it less scary and a lot more manageable to take these adventurous trips and leaps and just kind of go out there and find a trail.
And do you have any fun, I don't know, is there a special moment or a fun story where you were riding along and you were just having that, yes, this is an adventure and this is why I'm doing this?
Well, I feel like every ride we do kind of turns into that because every place we go is new and fresh and exciting. And we've kind of become addicted to going places new. We don't really like repeating the same thing. Aaron really loves navigating and discovering new trails and kind of bushwhacking. So he really kind of pushes me to do that. Whereas I would prefer to at least be on some kind of beaten path where I don't have scrub brushes and tree branches and thorns and cactus trying to stab me the whole time. But when we were in Arizona and he had first gotten his horse River and started really enjoying riding, he would go like on Google Earth or something like that and look around at the terrain and try to scope out a way to connect this trail to this trail and go somewhere new and explore and try to break a new trail. So we ended up getting into quite a few scenarios where I had agreed to let him bushwhack and try to discover a new trail. And then we would just end up just surrounded by cactus and kind of like reach a dead end where there's a cliff on one side and the mountain goes straight up on the other side, and there's cactus in front and cactus behind and huge rocks, and the horses would just kind of stop and be like, "Are you serious? Do we have to do this?" It happened more than I would like to admit. So we got into a few arguments like, I don't care if you want to go try to break a new trail, just do it without me next time. I'm over the bushwhacking. But we've only had a couple times where we've gotten into what could have been a dangerous situation. For instance, when we were in South Dakota, we decided we wanted to ride to the highest peak in South Dakota, and it's called Black Elk Peak. It's in a natural area called the Black Elk Wilderness. And so we trailered to the trailhead, and it was about 60 degrees and sunny. It was warm and gorgeous, like the perfect temperature. So we take off on this trail, and it's a few miles up a very steep mountainside, and we get about halfway to the peak, and all of a sudden the dark thunderheads roll in, and I start hearing thunder and seeing lightning in the distance. And I've done some high elevation mountain climbing and hiking, and I know that you don't want to be on the peak of a mountain when thunder and lightning are happening. So I start getting very nervous, and we essentially got to the point where we had to weigh the option of turning around or continuing. And the trail that we were on was so steep and rocky and muddy and slippery because it had just snowed a foot and all of that had melted. Ultimately, we decided we were going to push on and try to get to the peak and over it before the storm came in, because it was so much worse and treacherous to try to turn around and backtrack. So we did put our raincoats on and get drenched with rain, but luckily the storm passed over fairly quickly and lightning didn't strike too close. And it kind of cleared up a little bit. It was cloudy, but the thunder and lightning had stopped by the time we reached the peak. And it was really beautiful up there. You're on this high mountain, and there's a stone fire tower. So it's kind of like a big lookout tower, and you can walk into it and climb the stairs to the very top and stand up there and get a 360-degree view of just endless mountains and forest. And it was absolutely gorgeous. And there was a hitching rail where the horses could tie up and wait for us. Excuse me. So we spent a little time looking around and talking to other people that we met up there and having a good time. And then got back on the horses and started down the opposite side of this peak. And the trail was a little bit less rocky and less steep, but even muddier and slipperier. And again, by the time we were almost halfway down, another storm came in and the thunder and lightning started, and it was pouring rain, and we just got completely drenched, and the wind was blowing and just cut through you. It went from being too hot in the morning, like almost too hot to be comfortable, to freezing cold. And it's just such a learning experience coming out into these western high elevation areas, you know, seeing how quickly the weather can change. And I've learned to be prepared for every scenario that way. So now, instead of being like a minimalist English tack type person, I have a big like saddlebags, and I carry all kinds of emergency equipment and spares kit to repair any broken tack, and I strap my rain jacket and extra layers of clothing onto the back of the saddle. So you know, I see why photos of those Western cowboys always have a slicker tied to the back of their saddle, because you absolutely need it.
Wow. And I can imagine, like, the bond that you must have developed with both of your horses over this process.
Yeah, we really are our own little herd. It really makes me happy when we're way out in the middle of nowhere and we get to a gate or a down tree, some kind of obstacle, and we have to dismount, and you know, we can kind of just let the horses loose, and they drop their heads and snatch a few bites of grass and hang out and just wait. Or sometimes I'll get off and walk on foot for a while to like stretch my legs and loosen up after many hours in the saddle. And my horse Mackenzie will just trail along free behind River and Byron, and we'll all be walking down the trail, just plodding along together. And then on days when maybe Byron has to work or something and I want to ride, I'll take the horses out by myself and pony one off of the other. And then when we get to a more remote area, I can let the ponied horse loose, and she'll just trail along behind, or sometimes run ahead, bucking and farting, and make the other one a little too excited. So then I've got to deal with that. But it's really nice to just let them have the freedom to be loose and be horses when we're out there.
And I know, I mean, from my personal experience as well, my husband also started riding when he met me. And definitely when we're out in the middle of, you know, whatever country on the trail, I had a few moments in the beginning, like, you know, he was a beginner and I was like, oh gosh, you know, I had to put a lot of trust in his horse that, no, his horse is going to take care of him. And, you know, he's going to be fine because of his horse. So I can imagine in the beginning, did you have some, I don't know, like nervousness to bring him along with you on these adventures, and then how River would cope with it?
Oh yeah, definitely. When we got River, we went to look at her, and she was, you know, in somebody's backyard, tied to a stuck trailer with the saddle on, and I got on and rode around their yard and their driveway for about 10 minutes. And then he hopped on for about 3 minutes and tried to put her through her paces. And, you know, we had very little sense of what this horse was going to be like, but ultimately ended up purchasing her anyway.
I guess you must have had a good feeling about her.
Yeah, I mean, she seemed like a very good, honest horse, and even though I wasn't able to try her out long enough to really find out if she would be good for a beginner, I felt like we were in a place that had a round pen, so I could let him ride her in a confined area and get used to her and give him some lessons, even though he had ridden probably a dozen times on other horses over the years that we had been together. You know, he had never ridden consistently. So yeah, I was extremely nervous in the beginning, but he's very brave and kind of convinced me to just try it. And, you know, she'll probably just follow along on the trail. So we did a short little loop on his first trail ride outside of an arena. And this little horse just ended up being wonderful. We went through a tiny phase where she had gotten scared and shied sideways, and he, you know, fell off over her shoulder when she did that. And so when that happened, she lost her confidence and just started spooking and shying a lot. So I ended up having to do some remedial work and try to get her confidence back and get her to learn that not everything is going to jump out and bite her, and you know, she can spook in place and not have to shy sideways. So he did end up falling off about 5 times in a 10-day span. You know, every beginner goes through something like that, and I think it made both of them better for it, and now he knows what to expect and, you know, what to keep an eye out for. What's, you know, when we get into a situation where we know something is going to scare her, he now knows to be on guard and ready for that, whereas before he would be completely relaxed and oblivious. Actually, here's a crazy story. One time we were out riding in Arizona, and we were on a very popular trail. It's actually called the Arizona Trail. It's this, I think it's 800 miles or something along those lines, that goes from basically the border with Mexico to Utah through the Grand Canyon and everything. It runs the length of the state north to south. So there are all through hikers going through, people riding, people doing short day hikes on it. Very, very popular trail. So we're riding this trail and we hear some gunshots in the distance, which is not uncommon for Arizona or the West. Or, I mean, guns and target shooting and hunting are just a daily part of life out here. It's amazing how many people we run into with guns. So we weren't shocked by the fact that someone was out on this public land firing some guns. But then we round a corner and a gunshot goes off, and it is the loudest thing you have ever heard. And the horses spook and stop and look around, and it turns out that there are 2 guys in the back of a pickup truck with this huge rifle mounted on a tripod. It's probably a 50 caliber rifle, and they are target shooting literally across the trail that we are riding. And we're in kind of like it's not a big canyon or anything, but it's this flat area that the trail goes through with hills on either side. And they're literally backed up to the hill on one side, and their target is across the trail, so they're shooting into the hill on the opposite side.
Wow.
And we walk right in front of them. So we stop and we're yelling to the guys to try to make sure that they see us and they know we're there and that they'll stop shooting. And then, you know, we kind of get angry and tell them, like, this is a popular trail. It's a Saturday. There are people going by. There's a group of Boy Scouts that we just passed, you know, a bunch of kids hiking on the trail that are going to pass through here. And, you know, they didn't apologize. They didn't care at all. So we ended up having to pass them. And as the horses are obviously nervous because we're nervous and agitated. They just heard this loud gunshot. So we approach to pass the target, which is like a big white square with a bullseye on it that's sticking out of the ground. And I try to tell Byron, like 2 seconds before it happens, I say, watch out for the target. She's going to spook. And then as soon as the horse sees it, she spooks and shies sideways. So he gets control. Luckily, he doesn't fall off. And I tell him, okay, stop, let's dismount, and we'll just walk from here and try to get out of here as quickly as possible. So that's exactly what we did. And we continued, and they did cease fire long enough for us to get out of sight. But then, 5 minutes later, they start up shooting again. And it was that was probably the scariest experience, and certainly the most disconcerting to have to deal with, especially, we don't know what these people are like. Yeah, they're out there target shooting, but they could easily just shoot us as we have to walk right in front of their gun. There was no getting around it, because we were in this confined space. Ugh, that was the worst.
Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty, I'm gonna say, like, the stereotypical of what I think a lot of people think about America with our guns and and that's definitely something that you wouldn't expect to have to prepare for, is to teach your horse to be okay with gunfire while roaming the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely good that you guys, sorted it and got through that, and that everything was okay. Wow.
And talk about a beginner safe horse. How many horses would stick around when a huge rifle is being shot right at them?
Yeah. Wow. So I guess it has been nice for you to see him developing as a rider and the relationship growing. And
yeah, absolutely. He was always sweet on Mackenzie, my horse, and he started developing a relationship with her and would ride. When we would go out together, he's on foot following me on the trail or on the bicycle. We would switch occasionally. I would let him ride her for a little while, and he would go over and feed her treats occasionally, feed in the morning or clean the stall or whatever. But then when we got River and it was his horse, he would just dote on her and, enjoy grooming her and taking her out to graze and walking around. It was just really, really nice to see. And for a guy who grew up in the city and had never had even a pet before, like, he had a dog for a few years as an adult, but he's just not a through and through animal person the way that I am. It's been extremely satisfying to see how much he cares for his horse.
Yeah. So, ladies, if you're listening, you need to get a city boy and teach him how to ride. So, do you have any advice or words of wisdom for anyone interested in doing something similar?
I think really just do it is the best advice, because that's what I did. Do as much research as you can to make yourself feel a little bit more comfortable with taking a leap and going on an adventure. And always just keep in mind that it doesn't have to be permanent. We don't have any kind of end date in sight. We don't have a plan for where we're going to terminate our travels. We're just doing it until it's not fun any longer. And we know that when that point comes and we're tired of traveling, we can always go back to a normal life, quote unquote normal. We could stop, we could rent a house, we could rent an apartment, we could move somewhere else and go back to a traditional lifestyle. So, even if you do drop everything and decide to become a full-time gypsy, it's not the end-all be-all. You can always go back to the life you had before.
So just do it and bring a raincoat, right?
That should be my motto now.
And as far as, I think one of the big blocks a lot of people might have for starting an adventure like this is probably the funding and the, oh, how am I going to fend for myself? So as far as budget, I know you touched on it before that you were sort of on a budget and there were some free places that you could camp. But, how have you been able to manage financially this trip? And what would you say, I don't know, what does it cost to keep a horse somewhere for the night?
Well, we try to keep our living expenses fairly low. We live fairly minimalistically and had been doing so even when we had a house. But as long as you are conscious of maybe, cooking for yourself as opposed to eating out at restaurants constantly, I think that's the biggest expense, really. If you enjoy some other types of luxuries that are expensive, that is something that could be cut out to make it a little bit more budget friendly. Keeping the horses on the road is not really any more expensive than what full care boarding would cost. It does vary from place to place. So you could live for free on public land, but then you have the inconvenience of needing to be self-sufficient, like have solar panels for generating electricity and have water storage capabilities. And then there are limits on the amount of time you can stay in one place. So that's why we typically plan our moves every 2 weeks, because there are 14-day limits in a lot of the national forests, whether that's dispersed camping for free or staying in a campground. They do have their limits. But I would say on average, we tend to choose places that will cost about $20 a night. And that would be for the horses and our campsite. And that would be in like national forest and public land type campgrounds. And then when we're staying in a camp that has more facilities like we are now, where we have full hookups for the trailers, the horses have covered corrals, that's going to run a little bit more. Sometimes those range up to $50 a night. But what we try to do is stay for, say, a month. And then most campgrounds will give you some kind of discount for staying an extended period of time, like a month or more. So all in all, we typically spend about around $1,000 to maybe $1,200 between our campsite and facilities for the horses a month. Then I do feed will kind of vary because different areas of the country have more or less access to hay. So some places I was paying $20 a bale for hay, and then others could be as low as like $3. For example, in New Hampshire last summer, I was getting grass hay, like 50-pound bales for $3 because I went to a farm and literally as they were baling it, I was loading it into my truck in the field. So, it all depends on whether you kind of need everything laid out for you and you need all of the facilities that are going to cost more, or whether you can be a little bit more self-sufficient and take care of yourself and do more bare bones type living.
And I guess in America, there's always a farrier to call or a vet nearby, or...
Yeah, so that hasn't been too much of a problem either. I did decide when we were embarking on this trip that I was going to teach myself to trim, and I've always kept my horses barefoot anyway. So I do my own trimming so that I don't have to worry about getting a farrier. But there is a huge network of service providers. So any established campground with horse facilities that we go to usually has a contact list of a vet, a farrier, and a hay supplier nearby. So that's very helpful. But other than that, when the horses need shots or health certificates in order to cross state lines, I just Google the nearest equine vet, give them a call, ask if they provide these documents. And in the remote places with lower population density, it seems like it's never an issue to find an equine vet and for them to have an appointment open. And usually I just load the horses on the trailer, pull up to the veterinary office. The vet comes outside, gives them the exam, even while they're standing in the trailer. And then I get my paperwork and I'm good to go.
Perfect. Wow. Well, I know we've only just scratched the surface of your grand adventure. But, before I sign off, where can people follow your adventures and just watch your amazing pictures like what I've been doing?
Well, on a day-to-day basis, I post extensively on Instagram and Facebook at Ride Climb. And then our blog is rideclimb.com.
Perfect. And I'll include a link to that in our show notes on our website, and wherever you guys are listening to it, you can find the link to her website. So thank you so much. It's been very interesting to talk to you, and I definitely want to keep hearing more stories about your fun adventures and what you guys do next.
Thank you, Crystal. I'll keep you updated. Hope to talk to you again.
All right, thanks.
You have been listening to the Equestrian Adventuresses podcast. Please subscribe to our channel and check out our website, equestrianadventuresses.com, for links to the show notes. Leave us a review and consider becoming a premium member for bonus episodes and footage. More information can be found on our website. Until next time, Adventuresses, happy trails.